I'd like to thank everyone for pausing their day to help us honor veterans. For those who don't know me, my name is Matt Barber. I served in the Army with the 101st Airborne as an infantryman from 2002 to 2005. During that time, I participated in the invasion of Iraq. I was later recalled and sent to Afghanistan as an infantry team leader and eventually an infantry squad leader from 2007 to 2008. I'm currently the commander of the VFW post here in Winchester, the town that I grew up in and where I was a 2001 graduate of Winchester High School. The last class to be able to say we graduated in a time of peace. For some it may come as a shock that regardless of how much we like to ignore the ongoing conflicts, there are still American men and women fighting against terrorism in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Africa. So I'd ask that we keep those men and women in our thoughts and prayers not just today but every day. I found it interesting that it was Byzantine Emperor Maurice who first talked about a social contract between citizens and veterans when he proclaimed, "The nation which forgets its defenders will itself be forgotten." So today I want to talk about veterans and the importance of Veterans Day here in the United States. For some, when you see veterans on Veterans Day, or for that matter, Memorial Day or the 4th of July, you may think that the veteran standing there with a hat reflecting their service is there wanting some form of attention. I can tell you that each individual veteran is not sitting there begging for praise or admiration. We're here because of this unwritten social contract that was known over 3,000 years ago during the Byzantine Empire, that all of us, those that served and those that did not serve, should remember and honor the sacrifices made on all of our behalf. For us as veterans, that can be a direct sacrifice where we can put a face and a name to the sacrifice made directly for us while overseas. It is this social contract that we are here today, and it consists of this. In exchange for that veteran's health, in exchange for that veteran's youth, in exchange for that veteran's innocence, we spend a few days each year where we stop our own lives, no matter the inconvenience, and remember the living cost of freedom. On Memorial Day each year, we honor those whose lives were ended far too soon in exchange for that freedom. On the 4th of July, we honor the birth of our nation by the first patriots who stood up in the face of an imperialist nation to give us rights and freedoms for each American individual. Rights so effectively secured that we tend to view them as guaranteed and not as the simple words written on paper that could be erased just as easily as they were written. But today, as on November 11th each year, at 11 a.m., we ask you to pause your lives with us, not for us. On November 11th each year, we ask you to show us that those brave young men and women who had sacrificed their tomorrows for our todays, those young men and women who left our shores to fight to ensure our freedoms, whose names veterans cannot forget, whose faces, many of those faces whose last moments in life are forever etched in our minds, that their sacrifices are not forgotten. While this day may be Veterans Day, there's an irony to this date, because on the day that was supposed to represent eternal peace, in hindsight, it should have foreshadowed all the future wars and with it the future veterans who would have to repay that price for our freedoms over and over again. It was on November 11th, 1918 that World War I ended and what was then known as Armistice Day was created. That war consisted of trenches filled with men living in squalor, chemicals were used that destroyed them from within, and bayonet charges into heavily fortified trenches covered by machine guns, all that equaled a great cost of life. On November 11th, 1918, peace was declared between the world's nations officially to begin at 11 a.m. It is said that the guns fell silent at 11 a.m., when even the American General Pershing had known as early as 6 a.m. that the armistice had been signed, meaning the guns should have fell silent much before that fateful hour. That the decision to cease the conflict at 11 on the 11th day of the 11th month was made more for symbolism than for any other rational reason, because on that day, on that hour, when the world allegedly declared peace, on that same day after the peace had been agreed as early as 6 a.m., we lost 3,500 American lives, to include a charge by Marines as late as 10:30 a.m. to gain ground in exchange for these brave men's lives. It is the action of those brave souls, particularly on that last day and those last hours, that I believe embody and represent the fighting spirit of America and every American veteran. For 2 days before the armistice, senior military leadership on both sides knew the end was near, yet they kept sending our young men over the walls. I cannot imagine the rumors and thoughts of those young soldiers and Marines fighting in the trenches. I can't help but remember all the rumors of peace whenever I was in Iraq, rumors of New York parades, of early returns home, and the prayers and hopes that times that you could last another hour, another day, another week, and maybe you could end up getting home, all while not knowing that the home you yearn for can never be the same one that you left. For these young men on the front lines who had fought for months and years, that pressure and hope of returning to a normal life must have been enormous. On November 9th, 10th, and 11th, 1918, the average grunt in the trench covered in mud, blood, and stench. The amount of prayers sent to the heavens must have been overwhelming. Yet on those same dates, the whistle was blown, and over the trench they went, many not to return a few hours away from realizing those same dreams of homes and prayed. When armistice was declared, peace was believed eternal, and we showed these veterans with parades, then off to home, where they were forgotten and even forced to make an uprising to get simple benefits owed to them by the government and the people who sent them to foreign soil. A sad tradition carried on by our own government today, with veterans down the road in Quincy dying over the last few years of Legionnaire disease, with the government doing little to nothing to actually stop the deaths unless it has political meaning. Much like the rebellion and the problems plaguing veteran services and programs today, we're foreshadowing that we will forever send our young people to fight for our freedom, but that this social crimes act may not be upheld. So on we went to the next great war, World War II. In this war, we fought on two fronts along with our allies. The fighting was intense, the loss of life was so great that sending them for burial was far too often impossible, and we have American cemeteries throughout the world. Many of them are hastily dug graves where we have lost them, and their remains have been left unmarked and unhonored since their remains were placed there. When those brave men who survived came home, and for the first time wounded veterans who were allowed to serve in droves, we again quickly let them fade into the memories of great conflicts and stoic heroism, and we quickly forgot there were people who made those sacrifices. For many of these brave Americans, a simple national monument wasn't even erected in our nation's capital until decades later, when the veterans were starting to disappear due to old age, spurring honor flights to get them there to observe the monument and honor the greatest generation's service and sacrifice before they all disappeared. After the Second Great War, we began to call Armistice Day Veterans Day, because we finally learned that freedom would always be a political speech and radicalized ideology away from those freedoms being swept from our homes. The American people had gotten tired of war, the veterans limping around town because became the ever-present memory that we had to pay a price for the enjoyment of our freedoms. So much so that the Korean War was called the Korean Conflict, and then the Forgotten War, with many Americans not even realizing the tremendous sacrifice at places like the Chosin Reservoir or Heartbreak Ridge. Most people today don't even realize that we had even fought in Korea, let alone that it is still technically an ongoing war today, and there's always one defector crossing the border away from erupting again. Then came the Vietnam War, commonly called the Vietnam Conflict because we didn't want to think of it as a war either. During this time, we began to believe that freedoms were guaranteed and not paid for with our dearest product, the youth of our nation. To those Vietnam veterans, I want to tell you from the bottom of the heart of every veteran that came after you, we hold you in the highest of admirations. These honorably serving veterans were not only spit on and shunned by those who did not serve, but they were denied admission to veterans organizations for years. As a nation, we'd forgotten what our ancestors had taught us. The simplest thing in the meaning of the Constitution, which in reality is only a piece of paper that we place in high regard, that our freedom, much like that paper, could disappear in flames in a matter of seconds. These bravest of men and women who went to Vietnam in spite of those who called them names, in spite of celebrities supporting our enemies, celebrities who ironically are the epitome of benefiting from the American ideology of being able to be whoever you want, and in spite of the unpopular war, they still went and fought in the jungles, rice paddies, and swamps for the American ideal as well as the American people, who didn't even recognize the sacrifices that were made for them as they dishonored these great warriors. When I think of people saying do what's right, even though it may be difficult, I think about those that fought in Vietnam. They stood up when so many sat down, and they served with such distinction that to reach your warrior level is a standard to be reached by us who came after you. During the Persian Gulf War, better known as Desert Storm and Desert Shield, we seemed to find our way again. We remember during that month-long air campaign and days of ground combat that followed that we existed not only to preserve our own freedoms but to free the oppressed. Finally, it seemed, during this time when we began singing Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA at the top of our lungs, that our Vietnam veterans could dust off their hats and were finally given the respect they deserve for their honorable service. On September 11, 2001, we all were thankful that we had a military to go out and destroy our enemies. We were united, and frankly, that feeling of pride was so overwhelming that I'm shocked Veterans Day didn't turn into Veterans Week. But 19 years later, I have been ever so reminded that it's not Veterans Day 2001 or 2002, and that times have changed from that fateful day. You see, then, you couldn't go to the store and find an American flag on the shelf, just stickers representing where the flags had been and that they were sold out. To have a faded or tattered flag would have resulted in a fist fight. We said things like never forget, much like on December 7, 1941, when we called it the date that will live in infamy. But most today can't tell you why we're supposed to remember it. Yet here we are, 2020, a year that will be remembered for hatred of each other, when we've opted to destroy ourselves from within by hating each other over trivial differences that once we just talked out, and end the conversation with respect for differences of opinions, a handshake and a drink. A year that we are asked to wear masks to protect those who are vulnerable. A year that we destroyed our own communities. A year that we destroyed ourselves, and in doing so spit on the sacrifices made for us over the last 200 years. A year we frankly stopped being Americans. A further year away from remembering that our inalienable rights are actually alien, that they are not guaranteed, that they are forever in doubt, and they will only be guaranteed through the blood and sacrifice of our use, so that we can have our Amazons, our Facebook, our Netflix, and our Hulu. So on Veterans Day 2020, I would like to issue some challenges not just for today, but for all times. When we go out and onto the rest of our lives, remember that sacrifice of the Americans in the wars we have fought are fighting for those sitting in the classroom today, from kindergarten through seniors in college, who will inevitably fight somewhere in some country whose name we don't yet know, but whose cities, towns, rivers, and other named geographical features our children will not forget because of the inevitable future loss and sacrifice that they will make for our freedoms. Remember, the price of freedom is sacrifice, and ask yourself if you're living an honorable life for those who sacrifice their todays for our tomorrows. Ask yourself the question that each combat veteran asks themselves. Would those who sacrifice their lives be as proud of me as we are proud of them? Instead of deleting friends on social media or arguing, seek out those who have opposing views from yours. Don't call them an idiot, berate them, or argue without yourself having an open mind. Ask what experiences they have that are different from yours, and what experiences do they have that make them have their beliefs. Don't seek out to educate anyone without yourself being willing to accept education. You live your life to make others better, but while also making every effort to better yourself. Do all this because of the sacrifices of not only the veterans present today, but for our children, grandchildren, brothers, sisters, nieces, and nephews, who will undoubtedly have to repay the price owed for our freedom. While ceremonies, parades, and free food for veterans is nice, living your life worthy of the sacrifice and pausing to remember that sacrifice, if only for a day, is how we can honor veterans. There is a saying amongst combat veterans that if we remember and say the names of the fallen, they will never be forgotten. Here are a few of the names of those that we all should know from Scott County, and whose trees were planted in their honor and provide us with shade as we stand under them each Veterans Day at the park. Daniel Havens from Winchester, killed December 28, 1967 in Vietnam, an Army combat engineer, killed in Tai Nhi Province. Doug Hoots from Winchester, killed September 4, 1967 in Vietnam, an Army combat engineer killed by small arms fire in Quang Nhi Province. James Price from Winchester, killed July 15, 1967 in Vietnam, killed on his Air Force base when it was attacked by over 50 rounds of 120mm rockets. Richard Woodson from Winchester, killed August 1, 1967 in Vietnam, an Air Force pilot who was shot down and killed while providing strafing runs and bombings to protect a Huey crew who had been shot down, ultimately saving several lives in exchange for his. If you visit his virtual wall, you can see those who thank him for his sacrifice in exchange for their lives. Reading it for me was a very humbling experience. James Hutton from Bluffs, declared dead while missing on March 11, 1967, a member of McAfee Advanced Team 3. Philip Kilver from Bluffs, who was killed on October 25, 1970, due to a vehicle crash while serving in Vietnam. Teddy Stillman from Root House, killed on February 27, 1967, a mortarman who was killed during a rock artillery attack. Two of my friends from Charlie Company, 1st 502nd, 101st Airborne. Brandon Rowe, who's from Roscoe, Illinois, killed on March 31st, 2003, during an assault during Al-Halal, Iraq. Jason Fegler from Virginia Beach, Virginia. Killed November 4th, 2005 while conducting combat operations at the Triangle of Death. Two heroes we should all remember. Andrew Tobin from Jacksonville, killed August 24th, 2011 in Kandahar. left behind a window in a future here in Winchester. Matt Weikart from Jacksonville. Killed July 18, 2010 in Patika Province. Some of his family members have graduated from Winchester. While none of us knew all of them for different reasons, each left this world to guarantee our freedoms and each made an impact on different people in our communities. So my final challenge for everyone would be to find a name of someone who was killed. Remember their names, remember their sacrifice, and remember their families, and hold them in higher regards than we do Kim Kardashian, Taylor Swift, or Tom Brady. And remember these brave men and women, not the politicians. They represent the true spirit of America, and through their sacrifice and through their service and sacrifice, we can see the real America. Remember them when you hear our national anthem, and understand those words aren't just saying for what has occurred, but that each word spoken and saying is as much a goal as it is meant to be a reflection of our nation's triumphs. Now when you go to a parade, you stand for the American flag out of respect for not only the sacrifices made under the flag, but out of the understanding that the flag represented freedom for future Americans during the Revolution whenever it was first stitched. It was the symbol of freedom from bondage and slavery during the Civil War. It was worn on the arms of soldiers parachuting into and landing at Normandy, freeing the European people, as well as lifted over islands in the Pacific by Marines, fighting island by bloody island. And stand because somewhere not known to us yet in the world, future Americans will be asked to fight and die so that others may experience the same freedoms we take for granted today. The most important reason to stand for the flag, because that same flag has draped countless coffins and bodies of America's youth yesterday, today, and tragically will tomorrow. Thank you for your time, your patience, and attention during my speech, and I ask you to please live every day in a way that honors the sacrifices made on all of our behalves.